Hello, I'm Emma Desi, and welcome to another episode of Turning Readers into Writers. If you're brand new here, welcome, and here's what you need to know. This is a community that believes you are never too old to write your first novel. No matter what you've been up to until now, if you're ready to write your book, I'm ready to help you reach the end. I focus on helping you find the time and confidence to begin your writing journey, as well as the craft and skills you need to finish the book. Each week I interview debut authors, editors and industry experts to keep you motivated, inspired and educated on all things writing, editing and publishing. If you want to catch up, head on over to emmadesi.com where you'll find a wealth of information and tools to help you get started. Before we dive in, this week's episode is brought to you by my free cheat sheet, 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write. In this guide, I give you 30 ways that you can find time to write in the small gaps that appear between the various errands and tasks and responsibilities that you have in your day-to-day life. Now, you might be thinking that you don't have any time to spare, but I can guarantee these top tips will give you writing time you didn't think you had. If you thought writing always involved a pen and paper or a keyboard, think again. If you thought you needed at least an hour at a time to write your manuscript, I help you reframe that. You won't be disappointed. Get your free copy of 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write by going to emmadesi.com/30 Top Tips. Okay, let's dive in to today's episode. Martha Alderson, MA, is known as the Plot Whisperer for her best-selling book, The Plot Whisperer: Secrets of Story Structure Any Writer Can Master. She writes novels for readers, plot books for writers, and most recently, Boundless Creativity, a spiritual workbook for overcoming self-doubt, emotional traps, and other creative blocks for anyone looking to enrich their lives with more creativity and inspiration. She lives and writes in Santa Cruz, and you can learn more about Alderson on her website and connect with her on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. But before we do that, let's dive into our conversation and find out a little bit more about the Plot Whisperer and her new book, Boundless Creativity. Well, Martha, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
A pleasure. I always start off by asking my guests, tell us about your journey to writing to words. How did you get started?
Okay, so I started out by, I had a speech, language, and learning disability clinic for children for years. And then we moved to Colorado, and my dad was trying to write a biography about one of our ancestors, but he wasn't getting anywhere. So I said, oh, send me everything and I'll just get you organized. And, without any writing background, I'd never thought about writing. I wasn't interested in that. I loved what I was doing, helping children, because I had grown up dyslexic and I was nonverbal. And so I just got hooked. This story kind of came out of me when I was organizing these notes, and I just went into this wonderful world of make-believe, even though it was a real person. And, I was always a daydreamer as a kid. And, I love the fact that you can be a writer and, or still be a daydreamer, but call yourself a writer and get away with it. It's like, oh yeah, that's cool. So, but I really struggled with plot. I didn't understand what it was. And this was back in the day. And there weren't any books about plot. Now you can find books everywhere about plot. But at the time, even a lot of writing books didn't even have plot in their table of contents or their index. And so I started analyzing hundreds of novels, memoirs, and screenplays, and really got what the rhythm was and what plot and structure was all about. So I started teaching my writing friends. Everybody was asking, oh, will you show me what you're doing? And it just took off, the saying of follow your bliss. I think the fact that it says follow, because I just felt like I got this hook in me, and it was just speeding me ahead, and I was racing to try to keep up, and it wasn't really planned. planned journey. It was just a reaction journey of, as being asked to then write books and to speak at conferences. And so I sort of gave up my own journey of writing fiction in order to help a lot of other people write fiction, which has been so gratifying, because but what I found was in working with writers, even really brilliant writers, who had an unbelievable mastery of language and this beauty, and were just oftentimes the ones that were most fraught with anxiety, insecurity, fear. And, I was doing these plot consultations, and some of the people I was working with were so nervous about what they were doing, and they were getting rejections or whatever, that they actually had kind of major health issues, some people, and that really got me to the point of wanting to deal with that part, because I could identify with it. I've had all those same feelings. I think we all do, especially when we're going into the great unknown. When we don't know exactly what we're doing, we look around us and we think everybody else knows what they're doing, which happened to me early on with plot. I looked around and I thought, oh, everybody must know plot because nobody's talking about it. But then I realized once I started teaching it that really nobody really got what it was either, which was very gratifying.
Yeah.
So that's sort of what my journey has been. And then this year I turned 70 and I decided, you know what, if I don't do what my dreams are, it's either now or never sort of thing. So I still do consultations and I still do, podcasts and workshops and things like that. But my main focus now is on my own fiction, which is just really a joy.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I will come to that a bit later. But I did want to just kind of take you back to that first book, The Plot Whisperer, for which you became most known for. But I find it fascinating to hear you say, no one was talking about plot then, it wasn't a thing. And yet now, as you say, there's shelves and shelves of books on plots. That's really interesting. And it's another example of, not seeing what you need and so writing what
Exactly.
you need.
And I also think that at the time, sort of the environment was that for a lot of creative writing teachers, there was a fear that if you got too involved in plot, which is very linear and sort of structured and all of that, that it would somehow tap down the creative process itself. But what I realized the more that I started, getting into this was, I think that was just a cover, because I think some of these writing teachers didn't know plot either, and they didn't know how to teach it. So it was like, oh, well, we don't really need it. We're just going to work on this creative writing, which is essential, obviously. But if you don't know how to satisfy your readership, because all of us who have grown up being read to as children, and, most writers are voracious book readers, and you sort of understand that there is a rhythm to a story, to all stories. And we have certain expectations, whether they're conscious or not, of sort of what's coming next. And we can use that in a way to twist things around, to throw off the reader, to get them to be more on the edge of their seat. But you sort of want to know what those things are so that you can manipulate them in any way that you choose to.
Well, I wonder if we could delve into that a little bit more. And I just wonder what you consider to be, the basics of plotting. What should our listeners kind of at a very fundamental level, what do you feel that they should be most aware of or giving thought to?
Okay, so I think a plot is both the dramatic action, there's a dramatic action plot, and there's a character emotional development plot. Lots of times, I don't know now what it's called, but before it used to just be character development. But I call it character emotional development because we, at one point, emotions weren't really accepted. It's like, don't show deep emotions, you got to control yourself or whatever. But now people are really into wanting to express themselves fully, which means that we have to express all these emotions. And in a story, if you can capture a character's emotional development, how they start, by being a flawed individual, and how they sort of grow out of that or into, emotional maturity. And then there's thematic significance. What is sort of the overall meaning of your story? What's pulling it all together into fullness? And so, yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think you did. Those essentially, it sounds like these two kind of arcs. Yes, the action and what's happening, but equally important, if not more important, would be that emotional arc that your character is going on a journey and they have some form of transformation or some form of evolvement or understanding possibly of themselves.
And I think that the books that are now classics, if you go back and analyze them, you'll see that part of the reason that they are classics and that they are so beloved is because the writer did tap into that emotional element. Whereas for a lot of sort of male fiction, I don't want to be gender biased, but where it's either mystery or suspense or whatever, the character emotional development wasn't really that involved. And you can see that in blockbuster movies from years ago. It was all about the dramatic action. Let's just hit them with all these special effects and all this excitement. Whereas I really think writers crave that emotional element because we know how flawed and fragile we are. And we want to see that mirrored in the characters that we're reading about.
Yes. And so when you're working with new writers, specifically on plots, what are some of the more common mistakes that you see them make as they're sort of grappling with these concepts?
Well, one is the emotional part for themselves, of wanting to give up. Another is that they will constantly go back to the beginning to start over again. Like you get to about the middle of the story and things get very confusing and dicey because you've got, all these characters and all this stuff happening, and you think to yourself, oh, I got to go back and get organized. But really what's happening is that you're sort of sabotaging yourself because you need to push through. Whether you can get all the holes plugged up in the first or second draft doesn't really matter. It's that you want to get to the end, because in order to know what happens at the beginning, you have to have written the end, not just plotted it out, but you have to really have written it moment by moment and seeing not the resolution at the very end, but the climax or the triumph scene where the character is able to do something that they couldn't have done anywhere else in the story because they had to go through all of the ups and downs and mistakes that they make along the way and confront all the different antagonists. And so I think that's kind of the main thing that I see, and also to appreciate that we don't necessarily write both plot lines at once. For most of us, we have a preference or a strength, either in writing character, which I find women generally do better with that. Not to, this whole gender thing is so fluid now. I'm not sure how to talk about it anymore, but you know what I mean. And then for men, often they do much better with the dramatic action, much more linear and analytical and logical and all of that. Whereas for a lot of women, it's much more emotional, what's happening to the characters internally. And so when you know what your strength is or where you feel the most comfortable, you can write the whole first or second draft in that strength, and then to come back and really try to get the other plot line in there in order to satisfy both the excitement, which is the dramatic action, and the character emotional development, which is sort of the identification between the reader and the story.
I love that you've pointed that out for us, actually, that you don't need to have both plot lines, both arcs worked out entirely. And I 100% agree that you've got to finish that draft before you kind of know the entirety of your story and even what's motivating your character at the very beginning. And you've put it so brilliantly just a moment ago when you said you don't need to plug every hole, you've just got to get to the end. And I think a lot of particularly people who like to plot very heavily, they feel they've got to have everything worked out before they start writing. Martha, do you mind?
Right. Oh,
So yeah,
okay.
so sorry, we were talking about plugging the holes, yeah.
Right. And so you don't need to know everything. And I think what's interesting is to allow yourself to just write. When you get to a part that you're not sure, oh my gosh, what's going to come next? Just write in the manuscript, come back to this later, especially if you know maybe a couple scenes further along. And I'm really into these energetic markers, the major turning points in a story. And if you can at least pre-plot those, there's a major one at the end of the beginning, there's a major one at the end of the first half of the middle, there's a major one about 3/4 of the way through the book, and then there's a major one towards the end. If you're aware of what those are on both the dramatic action and the character emotional development, then it at least gives you this foundation. And you then are filling in the scenes so that rather than having that daunting task of feeling like, oh my gosh, I've got to write all these words and all these pages from the beginning to end, if you instead think about each section as being uniquely different with different expectations, because what's going to happen at the beginning and what you're going to want to convey to your reader in the first quarter of a story is vastly different than, say, what's going to happen in the the third part. So if you can just think of it in 4 parts and allow yourself to fill in the scenes between the energetic markers, it's not so daunting. It's much more manageable, and it allows you to feel that sense of accomplishment, because when you get each section done, it's just a very empowering thing rather than feeling like, oh my God, it's going to take me forever to get all the way to the end. Yeah. So anyway, I just find that a lot of writers feel comfort in that.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's kind of move, sort of go with that idea of finding comfort and finding confidence and letting go of the self-doubt, because that's what you tackled in Boundless Creativity. So you've touched on a little bit about what drew you to that subject. Was it something that you experienced yourself, or was it that you saw it around you and thought, I need to address this?
Well, it's something I've struggled with, my whole life, really, the insecurity and sort of playing small and just not feeling like, being enough, not smart enough, don't work hard enough, whatever it is that we beat ourselves up about. So I definitely could own that. And then when I saw it in the writers that I was working with, it was just heartbreaking. And it was helpful because it allowed me to be able to understand how limiting that was for myself, but also wanting to reach out and support writers who were struggling. And so in the Plot Whisperer book, I do talk about that. And that was a big part for a lot of writers. It became almost sort of a cult thing, that people wanted more of that, which is why I wrote the Boundless Creativity workbook. Because I wanted to be able to take people, all creative people, because we all creative people suffer with this, or most of all that I've met, and take them through the universal story, which is something I talk about in the Plot Whisperer book, but to take them through the universal story on their own journey, which mirrors really a protagonist's journey. And if you can see that similarity, it helps you become a better writer, I think. And it also allows you to understand that you too will go through these same stages, and you probably will reach the 3/4 mark, which is the dark night or the crisis or the, the horrible place where everything falls apart, and whatever you thought you knew, you find out you didn't. And to not take it so personally, but to understand it's a universal form. It's part of emotional maturity, and that we have to die to our old personality in order to sort of become resurrected into who we really came here to be as individuals, and to be able to bring our gift forward to the world.
That's right. So okay, so that the workbook just helps the writer put themselves in the protagonist of their own life and see
Exactly.
it from that way. So is that one of the things that you've experienced with the writers you work with, is that if it doesn't go well, if it doesn't go right, if they're struggling, they take it very personally and think that they've failed and they're getting it wrong, rather than this is actually part of the process, or it's a complicated story. But they're just feeling internally, oh my goodness, I don't have this in me, I can't do it, I'm not good enough.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how many writers who I have found to be, really gifted, talented, give up. And it's heartbreaking because their gift won't be able to be appreciated by the outside world because they're playing small. They're holding their gift and judging themselves harshly. And so I think that by really seeing it as a journey and appreciating the gifts that are being given to you by going through this journey, and to understand that writing a book, a novel, a memoir, whatever it is not that easy. And if it were, everybody would do it, although now it feels like everybody is doing it, but not necessarily well, because they don't necessarily know or research or, learn what the expectations of the reader really are.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I love the Boundless Creativity Workbook because it allows the creative person to take that journey step by step and see, because this universal story is something that happens over and over and over again. Each time we take on a new path, or we take on a new project or whatever, we're going to start at the beginning and we're going to hopefully go all the way through to the end. So people can sort of analyze, oh, I did hit this spot before. I have hit that spot where I wanted to give up. I felt like I was a mess. I looked around and compared to myself to everybody else, and I didn't, match up. And so by being able to see that, and also to appreciate those times that you were overcome by self-doubt, but persevered, and then came out the other end successful on whatever level that is, to be able to be empowered by that and understand that each time you go through the universal story, you become stronger, more powerful, and you settle into yourself, so that you can forget yourself and do what you came here to do.
So would you recommend that people sort of go through the workbook with every new project that they do, so they can keep themselves on track and then have that ability to reflect back on the last project and sort of say, oh gosh, yes, I've been through this before, keep going, don't give up?
Well, it's sort of an intense process going through the workbook. I didn't really appreciate how many exercises that I offered. But yes, it is, or even if it's, every couple years you do it, so that you can compare and see who you were, because the workbook, you fill in all these blanks, and it's like a journal. It's like a life journal. You can then go back and look and see, oh, I'm not that person anymore, because of these traumas in my life, or because of the hardships that I've suffered or whatever, I've really become a different, better version of myself, let's say. Not different, but just a better.
Mm-hmm.
That's even a
Sort of
qualifier.
grown.
You just become yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and not, you can let go of all the expectations that society and your family and all the things around us impose on us, and we take them like they're our own. But then, each time you go through a crisis or a dark night, you're able to slough more and more of that off to get deeper and deeper, which is another thing that I think is interesting about writing, especially fiction, is that when you write something and then you go back and read it, you can see that, oh, that isn't my truth. That's what I was taught to believe, but really deep down, I don't believe that. And so it allows you then to go deeper into your own writing and then convey these new truths that could really help evolve the world, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
That it allows then other people to break out of these molds, because we're really taught from a very early age to conform.
Mm-hmm.
It really helps in society, I think, to keep everybody in line. But in order for us to evolve and move into our greatness, we have to let go of all that to really discover who we are.
Yes, and it can be, I think is a sort of good point that you make there about, it can be a slow process, it's an involved process, but it's worth going through, because what you learn about yourself can really boost that inner validation, not coming from anyone else or from out externally, but you begin to see your own value and what you bring to the world. And as you say, I think you used the words, moving to your own potential, moving towards that, your own greatness, moving towards your own greatness. Yeah, so
I love what you said about the value, your own value, the gift that you came here to offer others. It gives me goosebumps when I think about it, because it really does evolve the world around us, and it allows each of us to convey different truths, even in our everyday life. When we meet our friends or whatever, and they say something that is just sort of cliched almost, because it's what everybody says, you're stronger, and to be able to present maybe other ideas, which then let people have that aha moment of, wow, maybe that's the truth. You know what I mean? It's a fascinating process. Writing, I think, is just, it takes you on an epic journey, and there's nothing like it. Even if you don't get published, even if you don't finish, which I really encourage you to finish so you don't have that hanging over you, but just the process itself is so life affirming.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Oh, well, I wanted to ask you also about, I'm changing tack a little bit here, but I did want to ask you about PlotRimo, which you founded, which I hadn't come across until I was doing my research for today. So it sounds great. I wonder if you can tell us a bit more about it.
Well, so in November is NaNoWriMo, and where everybody writes 50,000 words in the month. And what I found was how many writers at the end of the month, they were euphoric because they had passed or whatever. I've never done it myself, but I don't know. I think you get a little certificate or something to say that you achieved 50,000 words. But they realized at the end, they just had a lot of words. And now it's changed a lot. I knew Chris, the guy who started it years ago. And now there's a lot of pre-plotting that can go on. There's a lot of different things. But a friend of mine said, why don't you do something after the fact so that people can take all these words and then plot them out, and really create a form that is pleasing to the reader. And so I did that, and I started doing it on my blog, this Plot Whisperer blog. And so every day there was another assignment. And then I put it on YouTube. I have a free YouTube where the 27 steps are there. And then I did a video series with my agent who was my agent at the time. And now I sell it on my, my website. But it's a way for people, after they've written maybe the first or second draft, they can go through the program step by step and make sure that they're hitting those points. And some people, watch the videos before they ever write because they sort of want to know what the expectations are. Others want to just be able to write, get the words on the page, and then go back and to form it into a real story.
Mm-hmm. I imagine that works particularly well for pantsers who kind of have no idea, and I'm one of those, not really much idea of what I'm going to write until I've written it, and then have that quite lengthy revision process. But having someone kind of guide you through it will be so useful, because that thrill of, especially for brand new writers who are just giving this a go to see what happens, that thrill of doing the 50,000 words and thinking, my goodness, I did it, that's brilliant. Okay, now what?
Yes, exactly. Now what? And that's what I was trying to answer, that now what? And I think for pantsers, or people that write by the seat of their pants, or just on the fly, I just encourage them to lean into plot. You don't have to become a full-time plotter, but if you can start to lean into it, but really just become familiar with the energy of the universal story, how it rises and falls, so that you can at least feel like you're bringing that same rhythm and template into your story.
Mm-hmm. Now, we haven't delved too much into the universal story today, but that's something our listeners can find out more about at the Plot Whisperer, isn't it?
And in the Boundless Creativity, I go into it a lot too. So if you're more interested in sort of overcoming the self-doubt, you keep beating yourself up and stopping and starting and all of this, you may really benefit from Boundless Creativity, going through the workbook. If it's more about wanting to understand plot for your story, then the Plot Whisperer could be really helpful. And I also have a Plot Whisperer workbook that takes you through sort of those essential steps of the universal story. I did cut back a little bit because when the Plot Whisperer book came out, I got so much flack from, I think they were mostly men, and they were mostly left brain, linear, logical. And, they felt like there was too much California woo-woo in it, that kind of stuff. So then, of course, I overreacted and was like, oh my God, I don't want to, have that reputation. So in the workbook, it's not quite as obvious as it is in the Boundless Creativity or the original Plot Whisperer book.
Okay, well, I'll make sure that I link to all of those in the show notes so people can find them easily. Yeah. So I'd love to talk about your own fiction now. So at the top of the show, you were saying this is now something that you're prioritizing and doing it for you and for the love of it. And congratulations on publishing Parallel Lives last year.
Yes.
How was that experience for you?
Oh gosh, well, there's a lot of personal elements in that book, and I had worked on Parallel Lives for years, but was very reluctant to bring it forward. And I did independently publish it. I don't know how many years ago, but it was almost like I had to get it out there because I had to own my own story and I had to move beyond. And so then I decided to go back and to really refine it in the way that I knew I wanted it to be. So it was thrilling last year to put it out. Again, I independently published it, and I haven't done a lot of promotion about it because there are a lot of really dicey elements in the book, and it's sort of it's challenging to some readers, and it's also so personal. It was tough. So anyway, right now I've just finished it's a surfing love story, and I'm really excited about it. And so I'm hoping that that's going to find a home with a traditional publisher, and I'll be able to get that out in the next few years.
Oh, exciting, exciting. So you've just recently finished that. So that suggests that you were writing that over the last year or two through COVID and lockdown. Did you find that your writing was enhanced by being at home, or did you find it quite distracting, everything that was going on?
Well, that's just the way I live. I'm a very introverted, quiet kind of person. And yeah, it was nothing different for me. I mean, my husband does all the shopping and all the stuff out in the real world. And so, I love to be quiet. I love to have that time. And I have, through the years when I was teaching plot all the time, full time, that was my profession sort of. I was also always writing fiction. So I have like about another 5 novels that I would love to eventually bring forth. But yeah, I love that quiet time. I find that in the days that I used to do these huge workshops, with hundreds of people, it would take its toll. It would take me like a week or more to be able to recover from that emotional and that interaction, all that energy sort of bombarding you. I found it really, I didn't understand at the time what it was, but now I really understand that that's not who I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? How that can impact different people, because we can be introverts but still really enjoy that social side, and introverts and not particularly enjoy that kind of social side, and need that. Joanna Penn talks about it a lot, that when she does a conference or an event, she then needs to take a few days just to regroup and get her energy back. Yeah. Well, listen.
And I think it's really now, there's so much in the news now about self-care and all of that. And I think that it's because it hasn't been really addressed. And I'm glad that it is coming forward, because I think a lot of people, whether they're introverted or not, need to have downtime. And I think it's wonderful to be in your downtime to be able to have a creative project to work on.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, Martha, it's been so lovely speaking to you. We're kind of out of time now, unfortunately, but before we do disappear, I wonder if you could let listeners know where the best place to find out more about you online is.
Sure. Just go to my website, marthaalderson.com, and it has all my books there. It has my blog. It has some free resources, which I think connect you to the YouTube series that I have up. But I'm, on all social media. I only recently got on Instagram, so I'm not quite as, I love Instagram because I love posting pictures, but I've got to get better about doing real content on my Plot Whisperer page, because I just let it sort of languish there. But anyway, yeah, I'm all over the place. You'll find me if you want to find me. I'm there.
Lovely. I'll make sure our listeners get that in the show notes as well. That's lovely. Well, Martha, thank you so much for your time today.
Well, you're welcome. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to connect with your listeners.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found that helpful and inspirational. Now, don't forget to come on over to Facebook and join my group, Turning Readers into Writers. It is especially for you if you are a beginner writer who is looking to write their first novel. If you join the group, you will also find a free cheat sheet there called 3 Secret Hacks to Write with Consistency. So go to emmadesi.com/turning readers into writers. Hit join. Can't wait to see you in there. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.